Hi, this is the more fulsome sermon for October 14th, the 18th Sunday in the season of Pentecost, and I'll be looking at the gospel in particular. As you may recall, we now have in-person services at St. Thomas's. However, they have to be shorter services to limit potential exposure to COVID-19, and thus I don't get the same preaching time. So I thought I might do a little more fulsome sermons online. And if people maybe at services I sort of whet their appetite, they might want to come here and have a look and get something a little more meaty, as it were. And for those folks that are still at home and wanting something, well, here it is for you too. Let's start with the gospel. We return again to the vineyard. This is our third Sunday, I believe. Spending some time in a vineyard. From Matthew 21, beginning at the 33rd verse. Jesus said, I know he said it because it's written in red. Listen to another parable. There was a landowner who planted a vineyard. He put a wall around it, dug a wine press in it, and built a watchtower. Then he rented the vineyard to some farmers and went away on a journey. When the harvest time approached, he sent his servants to the tenants to collect his fruit. The tenants seized his servants, they beat one, killed another, and stoned a third. Then he sent other servants to them, more than the first time, and the tenants treated them in the same way. Last of all, he sent his son. They will respect my son, he said. But when the tenants saw the son, they said to each other, This is the heir. Come, let's kill him and take his inheritance. So they took him and threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. Therefore, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those tenants? The people listening to the parable replied this way. He will bring those wretches to a wretched end, they replied, and he will rent the vineyard to other tenants, who will give him his share of the crop at harvest time. Jesus said to them, Have you never read in the Scriptures, the stone the builders rejected has become the capstone. The Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore I tell you that the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people who will produce its fruit. He who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces, but he on whom it falls will be crushed. When the chief priests and the Pharisees heard Jesus' parables, they knew he was talking about them. They looked for a way to arrest him, but they were afraid of the crowd because the people held that he was a prophet. I remember this particular parable being studied when I was in seminary, in the heady days of the Jesus seminar. And as I recall it, this was one of the parables of the seminar, which was endeavoring to find the veracity or as to whether or not Jesus actually said these things, had determined in their mind that this parable was probably placed on the lips of Jesus. It wasn't one that he actually told, but was written by the church and placed on his lips. Because it was too neat, it was too tidy, it was too reflective of history, of the prophets and the eventual murder of Jesus and, of course, the destruction of Jerusalem. However, when I look at it, I see it as being a very real parable of Jesus, something that he would have shared. He's doing something that we've all done, that we've all experienced. Remember back in the day when we were able to get together and people would gather around water coolers at work, or you'd be in the backyard on still a warm fall evening, visiting with family and friends, and someone would be telling a story. And there'd be something about that story, a word, a phrase, a picture that it painted in our mind that would remind us of another story. And that's precisely what Jesus is doing in this particular parable. He's actually mentioning or referring to two stories in particular. One from Isaiah, the other from the book of Daniel. The one from Isaiah deals pretty much with the parable itself. It's called the Song of the Vineyard. It's in the 5th chapter of Isaiah, and I'll share it with you. Isaiah 5, beginning at the first verse. I will sing for the one I love, a song about his vineyard. My loved one had a vineyard on a fertile hillside. He dug it up and cleared it of stones and planted it with the choicest vines. He built a watchtower in it and cut out a wine press as well. Then he looked for a crop of good grapes, but it yielded only bad fruit. Now you dwellers in Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more could I have done for my vineyard than I have done for it? When I looked for good grapes, why did it yield only bad? Now I will tell you what I am going to do to my vineyard. I will take away its hedge, and it will be destroyed. I will break down its wall, and it will be trampled. I will make it a wasteland, neither pruned nor cultivated, and briars and thorns will grow there. I will command the clouds not to rain on it. The vineyard of the Lord Almighty is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah are the garden of his delight. But he looked for justice, but saw bloodshed. He looked for righteousness, but heard cries of distress. No doubt when people first heard that parable from Jesus, it would have triggered their collective memory of this story from Isaiah, of God planting a vineyard, of planting a nation, planting a people, looking for good fruit, a harvest from them that just wasn't there, despite, as God laments, all that he had done for the vineyard, all that he had done for his people. Still, they were not maturing, producing what he would hope they would do. Righteousness and justice. And so that vineyard would be destroyed, much as the vineyard, the farmers in it, Jesus' parable, would be. The second story that Jesus refers to, as I said, comes from Daniel. From the 2nd chapter, in which Daniel is interpreting King Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Chapter 2 at verse 31. You looked, O king, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were broken to pieces at the same time and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace, but the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream, and now we will interpret it to the king. You, O king, are the King of kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed mankind and the beasts of the field and birds of the air. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are the head of the gold. After you another kingdom will rise, inferior to yours. Next a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Finally there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron. For iron breaks and smashes everything, And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron's strength mixed with the clay. But it will be brittle, and just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united, any more than iron mixes with clay. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true and the interpretation is worthy. Jesus refers to a rock that when you fall upon it, you will be horribly injured. If it falls on you, you'll be killed. He is referring to the rock that Daniel speaks of, one not cut out by human hands, one that will smash the kingdoms of this world, and yet in and of itself will become a great mountain, will become a great kingdom of its own, a new kind of kingdom, a different kind of kingdom. Jesus is saying in a way that he is that rock, and they would have heard that. They would have made that connection. After all, the word for son is ben. The word for stone is eben, just one letter difference. They would have caught on to that little subtle clue that Jesus coming into the world was the end of worldly kingdoms. They were being smashed. They're going to be brought down, and they will be replaced by God's kingdom, by a new age. Now, what does all this mean for you and me? Because as Matthew points out, that the Pharisees, the scribes, sort of knew that Jesus was talking about them. He was talking about the religious leaders, that they were not producing the fruit. They weren't providing the leadership, morally or legally, that the people needed. Well, what does that have to do with me or with you? As a Christian leader, I suppose it does speak to me. I have a certain responsibility of stewardship for this piece of the kingdom. But as we are the priesthood of all believers, we all have a responsibility for bearing good fruit, for being good stewards of the vineyard that God has placed us in. For us here at St. Thomas's, it's limited. We might say, well, it's the west end of Kingston. For other churches, it'll be their own particular neighborhoods, their communities, that they're responsible for the building up of the kingdom. And so we are left with the same question God asked: what more can I do? What more should I be doing to help build up the kingdom of God here on earth, particularly in these COVID times? As churches, we've had to learn new ways of doing old ministry. We continue to do the things that we have always done, to care for the poor, to reach out to those who are isolated as best we are able. So we've learned how to use the internet in ways that I never thought I'd have to learn. We're developing telephone trees and ways of staying in touch and communication with each other. We're still endeavoring to collect food and other necessities for those who are less fortunate than ourselves. We're still proclaiming the gospel, but we must always challenge ourselves to continue to do what we're doing and to do a little more. That's our responsibility. That's the responsibility, the awesome responsibility, the privilege that God has given us as his children, to go out and work in the vineyard and to produce good fruits. So in the coming days, as you go about your work, as you raise your families, as you be in community, however you are able to be in community these days, let us never forget our responsibility to love and serve our neighbors, to love and serve God, and to build the kingdom here on earth until that day when Jesus completes it fully upon his return. May we be all blessed in our endeavors. God bless. Stay well and stay safe, and good Lord willing, we'll see each other soon. Take care.